After personal conflicts with Steve Harris, drummer Cliff Burr was fired from the band, and then in December of 1982, they hired a new drummer that still remains with the band today, named Nico McBrain, who previously played for a band that was called Trust. By their next year, with their new drummer, they released their fourth studio album that is called Peace of Mind, which received both a platinum certification in both the UK and North America, and once again selling over 1 million copies in the US, peaking at number 3 in the UK's album chart, and in the US peaked at number 14. And one of their most famous songs on this album, The Trooper, still remains probably one of their main radio staples and concert staples of today, receiving universal acclaim on all their songs, and basically becoming one of the most successful heavy metal bands of the early 1980s. The band's lineup remained the same through the rest of the 80s, and a year later they released their fifth studio album that was known as Power Slave. Power Slave had great hit songs like 2 Minutes to Midnight and Aces High, and a really great song, which is their longest song to date, that was based on the Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem called Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, running over 13 minutes long. It peaked at number 2 in UK's Billboard chart and in the US at number 21. And once again, for the third consecutive time, Power Slave sold over 1 million copies in the US. And once again, received very critical acclaim with all their songs. Following the album's release, a new tour called the World Slavely Tour, which was the largest tour to date, consisted of 193 concerts in 28 countries for over 13 months, and with an estimated 3.5 million people. Many of the shows were played back to back in the same city. And also, their first live album they released was called Live After Death, was recorded. And it became, once again, critical and commercial success, peaking at number 4 in the UK charts. The tour, of course, was physically bad for the band, which they demanded following the tour have a break, a 6-month break, but this was later reduced to 4 months. This would be the first break in the group's history, and they also a cancellation of their supporting tour of their new live album. And even Bruce Dickinson said one time he threatened to quit unless the tour ended. Following the band's break, they adopted a new style, and they are experimenting with different things with their 6th studio album called Somewhere in Time. Somewhere in Time was one of the albums that featured guitar synthesizers and provided a new sound for their music. And now, so this was not as positive as their previous album, but it was still a good album, and it still had positive reviews on it. And we still had great songs like Wasted Years, Strangers in a Strange Land, and still, once again, the album sold over 1 million copies in the US, peaking at number 11 in the Billboard charts, and at number 3 in the UK charts. That experiment continued with their next album called Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which was released on April 11th of 1988. It was Now, not only this was their last album to be released in the 1980s, it was also the last album to feature guitarist Adrian Smith until his return. However, this album was also a success, in fact actually more positive reviewed than their previous album, with great songs like Infinite Dreams, Can I Play with Madness, The Evil That Men Do, and it peaked, and there was one of the other albums that peaked at #1 in the UK Billboard chart. Though they did not sell as well in the United States. In the United States, they only sold 500,000 copies, compared to the 1 million copies that they had in their previous albums. However, this would be the beginning of the end for Iron Maiden for a while, as this would be one of their last successful and positive reviewed albums for a while. Following their other break in 1989, the band decided to drop from the keyboard and synthesizer progressive rock style that they had in the previous 2 albums. And this next album was supposed to be in favor of more stripped down and straightforward style that the band had they claim with their earlier material. Adrian Smith did not like the idea it was taken, and he decided to leave the band, and as well as to focus more on his solo career. And as a result, Adrian Smith was replaced by Janik Jers as the lead guitarist. Their next album was called the 8th studio album, I should say, is called No Prayer for the Dying, which was far less successful than their 80s album. And it was one of their first negative reviewed albums. And the reason why it failed so much, I would say, is because the album departed from more literacy and historical themes that they had in their previous album, and then what No Prayers for Dying had more political content in it, and as also with religious exploitations and also with social concerns. And this was also one of their shortest albums that they had, because it was the only album that they did not have a song exceeding 6 minutes in length. The album was a failure, though it did sell 500,000 copies in the US. However, it did manage to peak at #2 at UK's Billboard chart. However, this album was largely forgettable, and it was definitely probably one of their biggest flops during the Bruce Dickinson era. And that's all I could say about that album. After the failure of No Prayer for the Dying, they decided to change their style up a bit, make it more powerful, and as a result, they did that with their 9th studio album called Fear of the Dark, released on May 11th of 1992. Though this album was much better received than No Prayers for Dying, it still was mixed. It didn't have the acclaim as their 80s albums did. But once again, it did not sell as much in the US as well, with only selling about 450,000 copies. However, with this album, they did peak at #1 at UK's Billboard chart. And they did have some good law, like Be Quick or Be Dead, or even the title song just called Fear the Dark, or From Here to Eternity was some great songs. However, this will be the last studio album with their prized vocalist Bruce Dickinson until his return once again. In 1993, Bruce decided to leave the band to pursue a solo career. However, he agreed to go for one more tour called the Real Live Tour from March 25th to August 28th. However, the tour wasn't really that good, with Steve Harris claiming that Bruce Dickinson was underperforming. However, even though Bruce denied, he said it was impossible to make like Mr. Happy Face if the vibe wasn't right. And then the news of the exit from the band prevented any chance of good atmosphere during the tour. His final performance with Iron Maiden until his return was on August 28, 1993, that was filmed by BBC and was released on video under the name called Raising Hell. Also in 1993, Steve Harris was at his lowest point, with his first wife Lorraine, who he met 16 years previously, divorced. Also during that time, his father dying. And, of course, with Bruce Dickinson leaving the band, later faced, he said that was the toughest time that he ever had. By 1994, a band needed a new singer, and after hundreds of audition tapes had been sent through them, they decided to hire a man named Blaze Bayley, who previously worked for a band called Wolfbane. In October 2nd, 1995, they released their first album with Blaze called The X Factor. However, it was known to be a complete failure, being the lowest on the UK charts since 1981 with the Killers album. And even Steve Harris claimed that that this album brought the tone of his personal struggles during that time. And as a result, they had complete negative reviews. And unfortunately, they were at a very low 147 on the US Billboard charts, and they only sold 60,000 copies in the United Kingdom. Their best song or probably the only good song in that entire album was a song called Man on the Edge, which I like the song to this day. But this is known to be probably one of their worst albums during their time. And they basically waited 3 more years again before they released their next album.